You should have, like I said, you should have 2 questions ready. You are going to get participation points for these 2 questions, and I also want you to write down some key points. Okay, some key points for today. Anything that just that sparks your interest, or and we'll do a discussion about this real life application tomorrow. We'll do some discussion. We do have a test on Monday. You also get a review tomorrow, okay? But today we're focusing on 2 questions. How the government, what we've been looking at is how the government gets involved in small business. But today's about more than that. It's also about how this class, economics class, deals with real life. You have to know economics. The concepts we learn here, you have to know if you want to be successful. Okay, so he's going to hit on a lot of points today. But those 2 questions, one is about small business, and the other is about radio in general. Okay? So I'm going to introduce Rod Krol. He owns 3 radio stations now. And before that, building up, he's been at almost every level of radio and built up some of the stations that are right here in Lansing to be huge. So, Rod, come on up. Give him a round of applause.
Thank you. Broadcasting. What was the first question related to? Small business?
Yeah.
I think I can answer a lot of those questions this morning, but hopefully we'll have some fun. We'll move it along as quickly as we can, give you a chance to answer or ask some questions as well. The first 0 hour had a half hour, so we were kind of crammed into it, didn't have a lot of questions and answers, but hopefully we'll have enough time to be able to do that. But the broadcast business is a great business. It's changed over the last probably 15 years in particular. Okay. Any of you guys aspire to be in the business world? Are you your studies in college perhaps will take you to some level of business interest? Are you studying business? How many? Okay, that's probably comparable to the last class. What areas of business are you interested in?
Like marketing.
Marketing, okay.
I just want to do something like international.
Okay, all right. Somebody over here raised their hand, I think? Yes.
Marketing.
Marketing, okay. All right, so how about broadcasting? I don't think there was anybody, Mr. Lindquist, in the last class, right, that had any interest in broadcast, probably because they don't know anything really about it. And, you know, it's like, what do you want to do when you grow up? When you're a little kid, you want to be a fireman, right, or a doctor. As you get a little further, sometimes long, even in your senior year, even once you get into college, you really don't know what you want to do. And so, in my particular case, I can share with you some stories, primarily starting at the high school level and then continuing on through college, which is obviously your foundation here, but your learning experience is going to continue exponentially. And then life in the real world, which is, that's hopefully a long time for you. So if somebody ever asks you the question, once you're in the business for a while, let's just say you're in the business after 10 years and they ask you the question, how many?
Can I borrow Patrick real quick?
Patrick.
When you answer that question, think about how you answer it. If somebody says, how many years of experience do you have in the broadcast business? Today I could say 36. The next question that they ask me now is that 36 years of 1 year at a time experience? Or is it exponential experience, cumulative? Because that's really where you start to learn, you know? Even at year 10, you start to add extra things into your repertoire or your business acumen. And then all of a sudden, you know, you really grow because you take those early concepts. So when you answer that question, think about it, because it's really, it's not, you know, some people might have 10 years of experience, but it's 1 year at a time. They don't apply what they've learned. And so in the real world, that's what we have to do. Okay, quick question, pop quiz for you. I don't know how many points you're getting, or I guess we've got some station swag here, as they call it, okay? How many radio stations are licensed, or were licensed, by the Federal Communications Commission at the end of 2012? How many are there? AM stations? You guys don't even know what AM is, right? No?
Who listens to AM radio?
Anybody listen to AM radio?
Like I said before, it's the button you hit in your car by accident. And you hear what's going on, and you hear it from
AM
Chicago.
stations, FM stations, and educational stations, okay? Those count as radio stations. Take a wild guess on how many there are in the U.S. or were through 2012, December 2012. Come on.
$64,000.
$64,000 question. That's not right. Okay?
Here's some guesses.
Good try. Thank you for trying. I appreciate that. You know what? There's an old saying in the business world. You're responsible for trying, but accountable for succeeding. Write that down. You're responsible for trying, but accountable for succeeding. This is bonus points, right?
These are bonus points.
You're responsible for trying, but accountable for succeeding. In the business world, I know you're going to do your best. You're going to give it that best college try that you can, right, to get it done. Now, if that person says to me and said, and I ask somebody in the business world, can you get this done for me? I'll do my best. I'll try. That might be an acceptable answer, right? But not in this responsible for trying but accountable for succeeding world. You're accountable. If another person walks by and asks that same question and they say, you can count on me, who do you think I ought to go with? The second person, okay? That's a lesson that was taught to me just probably 10 years ago, okay? Here again, I picked up on that and now I'm using it. So what I'm trying to do here is to take those high school, college, real life experiences and not, hide them here and keep them for me, but I want to share them. I want to syndicate my knowledge. And that's what the real life opportunities that exist out there. Okay, back to that question. How many?
15,000.
Wow, that's pretty cool. And you know what? Just for being brave enough to answer, that $64,000 winner right there, okay? Now, when I started out in the business, okay, I say started out in the business. I didn't say as a broadcaster. I was in high school. I was in a high school economics class. The year was 1973. It was my senior year, okay? Can you imagine? I can't even imagine where that went. 40 years ago, I'm sitting and studying these same concepts: elasticity, supply and demand, get that curve out, price fixing, restraint of trade, all of these things. And you know what? I was inspired by my teacher. This gentleman right here is inspiring you today.
Trying to inspire
He's
you.
going to be considered for some of you a mentor. Okay? Which is good. That's a good thing. And you know what? Many will follow in your footsteps, and you'll have that opportunity to continue on. And the ball, the circle of life continues. But that economics class was my first exposure to the business world. And I found, wow, really, I love this. I love this stuff. All the monopolies and all this stuff. God, this is incredible stuff. At the same time, I had an interest in broadcasting. My local television station was doing a conference I lived in an area, I grew up in Ohio, and about an hour from Pittsburgh on the Ohio River. Steubenville, Ohio, probably never heard of it. Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, about an hour from there. And it was primarily a steel and coal area. Steel mills, coal mines. As a matter of fact, there's a big boom there right now because of this shale gas. Have you heard about it? It's incredible. It's starting to employ thousands of people. You know, and this stuff is, you know, underground, and they can go underground miles away and get this gasoline out. So in this area here, okay, it laid the foundation as well. You know, and so now all of a sudden, you know, I fast forward, I get into college. I'm still interested in broadcasting because in my high school, in my high school senior year, you know, we'd have the pep assemblies, and I grew up listening to AM radio. Okay, and AM radio at the time was king. Now keep in mind, this was 1973. FM radio was around. As a matter of fact, the company that I worked for in Lansing, a gentleman by the name of Bob Liggett Broadcasting, okay, who eventually had 6 stations here in Lansing that I managed for him. The first radio station that he bought was in 1970, and it was WFMK, 99.1. And the reason he bought it in 1970 is because he couldn't afford an AM station. AM was king. And so in the area I grew up in, okay, we'd listen to AM radio. And these fast-talking top 40 guys, these announcers, they were talking real fast. They called them motor mouths. I mean, it wasn't slow, it wasn't casual. It was, hey, double radio program, start, stay, screen, that kind of thing, okay? So they were, and I loved this stuff. I got into it. Well, the television station had this gathering of people interested in television, so I went to this, you know, and sort of, which one? Radio, television, I like them both. Business, I like this. So I ended up deciding to go to Ohio University in Athens, Ohio. Anybody hear of Ohio University? It's a MAC school. It's a good school. And they had one of the best radio television programs in the country. And I ended up still not knowing what I'm going to do. But once I got in, here again, we're still trying to decide along the way. I had an idea. I wanted business. I wanted broadcasting. I wanted radio. I wanted television. I didn't know. You know, I still had that face for radio, of course. Okay. So I ended up in 1973 getting in the radio television program and taking a lot of business courses. I said, you know, I decided after a short period of time that I wanted to go on the business side of things, okay? So that meant I had to take a lot of accounting classes, okay? I had to take a lot of economics classes. I had to take a lot of management administration classes, coupled with my broadcasting degree with FCC regs and all that kind of stuff. So here again, now all of a sudden, you know, I think I know what I want to do. I want to be a radio broadcaster or a television broadcaster. So I ended up, the college radio station had an opening, and it was on an FM station, of course, and I did the news, okay, in prime time. Prime time at 11:55 at night on an FM radio station on Friday nights. Well, I knew that really wasn't my calling, so I said, you know what, I want to try the business side. So I ended up getting in sales and becoming a sales manager for my college radio station. And so that was the thing that was sort of my launching pad. Okay. I then I took that degree. I had 2 job offers. We were on quarters, and so at the end of the quarter, in March of 1977, I had 2 job offers, and they were both in radio sales. Now, whoever grows up, you know, the doctors, lawyers, you know, firemen, not a radio sales guy, right? Salespeople, they're schleppers. They're you know, nobody thinks about that, okay? But of course, I knew what the business was all about, and I knew I eventually wanted to move up to the. So I took a job. This was in 1977. I stayed there for a year, and I was calling on a president of a bank, a local bank, and his brother was starting a radio station in one of the poorest counties in the state of Ohio that never had a radio station. Can you imagine? 88 counties in Ohio, similar here, close to it, right, in Michigan. So 88 counties, and I'm thinking, okay, well, this is a great opportunity. I went to my boss. This wasn't a station that was already on the air. I had to build it from scratch. I was 23 years old. But you know what? I was trained. I was ready to go. I went to my general manager, at the time was 40-some years old, and I said, Bill, I've got an opportunity of a lifetime. And I said, you know, I'm going to start this radio station from scratch, but I need your help and I need your support. Can you give it to me? He said, Rod, I'm 40-some years old. I've been in the business 20-some. He said, I have a difficult enough time running a radio station now, let alone starting it from scratch. I said, give me your FCC legal guide. The laws, of course, you know, if you printed them out, they would fill up the whole room for the FCC. This is what it was condensed to. So I took this, of course, with my knowledge, and that's where really my career began in management. And so one of the first things, we built the radio station, built the towers. Now, keep in mind, the FCC regulates everything, right? It tells you where these stations are located, what the power levels are, what cities they serve, and that's who we deal with. We deal directly with the FCC, okay, and indirectly with the FTC, the Federal Trade Commission, okay? And we'll talk about that as well. So now all of a sudden, I get the radio station built, we're ready to go, all kind of rules and regulations, and then I advertised for one of my first positions called a traffic director. The traffic director in the radio business is a person that basically schedules the commercials. You know, the salesperson gets the order, they plug them in the computer. At the time there wasn't a computer, so they did it all manually. They did what was called a log, okay? Where the rotations are, what spots to run where, and so forth, and that was it. So this position was advertised, and I get some candidates that come in, and there was one candidate that came in as a surprise in uniform. They were actually a traffic cop. They thought, you know, that this was the position. Keep in mind, first time in the radio station in their county, so well, they don't know what a traffic director at the radio station is. Maybe they're directing traffic in the parking lot. Okay, so here again, just another one of those little minor experiences. But the end result was that I ended up putting the radio station on, building it, stayed there for a year, went to work in Toledo for a while, and then I had an opportunity to become to get into the television business. So I spent 3 years, this was from 1979 to 1982, as a television sales manager. Okay, here again, still pretty young, you know, 24, 25 years old, and at the time that was really unheard of. But because I was fast-tracking my career, you know, you tend to move on early on. So I stayed there, and then I was recruited by a company to run an AM and FM radio station in Wheeling, West Virginia, okay? At the time, you could only own an AM and an FM radio station. That was it, in each market. That's all you were allowed to own, okay? We're regulated by the Communications Act of 1934. Can you imagine that? Okay, and it wasn't until 1996 that there was a rewrite of that Communications Act of 1934. It was called the Telecommunications Act of 1996. And that's when everything changed in terms of the amount of stations that one could own in a market. Before it was an AM and an FM, okay?
So Rod, you're telling me 62 years and no changes to the law?
There were some minor changes, but this was the first major overhaul amendment to that law. It was in 1996, the Telecommunications Act.
So things from the 80s that were going on, they had to follow something from the 30s.
Yes.
If that made any sense.
Let me give you an example of some of the rules, okay, some of the things that you take for granted. At the top of every hour, as close to that hour as possible, the radio station has to identify itself legally to the community of license. For example, I have 3 radio stations. I have one that's in Owasso, it's 92.5 The Castle, okay? And I have another one up in Elma. The one in Owasso covers Owasso, Corunna, St. John's, Ithaca, Elma, Ovid, Elsie, Fowler, and a little bitty piece of Lansing. You like that? A little bitty, that's my legal ID. And a little bitty piece of Lansing, because we have listeners in Lansing. The signal's not great. I live in East Lansing, and I can get the station through Good Bose Radio, but generally, you know, we do have people here. Another station that I own is up in Elma, and it covers Mount Pleasant and Elma. And then I recently bought one, I say recently, about a year ago, and we'll talk about this, that was in the Department of Justice got involved. I bought it from Cumulus Radio. Has everybody heard of Cumulus or Citadel? Okay, I bought it from them through a trustee because they had to spin off some stuff that we'll talk about. and I ended up buying that one back in December. So I have 3, okay? But, so, with these different radio stations, here again, 1996 was the big change, okay? So fast forward, I ended up moving to Lansing in 1988 to work for Bob Liggett. Bob Liggett was a privately held, Liggett Broadcasting Company, privately held, owned radio stations, Lansing, Saginaw, Grand Rapids, had owned them at one time in Detroit, had owned them one time in Minneapolis, had been out in California, but consolidated his operations to Michigan. He now owns all the big boy restaurants, primarily he owns them or they're franchised through him and so forth. He bought a company out of bankruptcy that owned them for years back in 2000 when he sort of got out of the broadcasting business, and he sold the stations that I was involved with in Lansing. So ended up moving to Lansing in 1988. At the time, remember I told you he bought WFMK back in 1970 because he couldn't afford the AM. Okay, so he had that one, and then it wasn't until 1995 or 96 when this telecommunications law changed that allowed you to go from 7 AM, 7 FM, 7 television stations across the country. Now, in Lansing alone, you could own up to 6. So he, at about that time, eventually bought 97.5. Have you heard of that one? 97.5. 1240 AM. He bought 100.7 Whittle. He bought 94.9 and 730 AM The Fan. Okay? So there were 6 stations. And the first stage of it was, here again, not until 95 or 96, you were allowed to own more than 2 stations. And then he eventually bought another 3, so he had 6 stations. So I became the general manager for all 6. We went from having 20 employees now to 110 employees, okay? Can you imagine somebody running 6 radio stations? I mean, seriously. One person is the general manager. Does that make sense? It does make economic sense, though, doesn't it? Rather than having 6 general managers, why not have one and pay him half the price of what he was originally getting? No, I'm just kidding. Okay, but the bottom line was, okay, we ended up consolidating, okay, and I ended up having a director of sales, okay, I ended up having a regional sales manager, and we ended up having 2 general sales managers that ran 2 local sales teams. And each sales team had 8 reps out calling for all these properties. So there were 16 reps on there, had program directors for everybody, had an operations manager that overseed the program director. So what we did was we redeployed those people, okay? As opposed to cutting, which is occurring now in our business, okay? We ended up redeploying those assets. And consequently, we drove the revenue to where at one time, you want to talk about a monopoly? We had a monopoly, but it got through the government, okay? And consequently, the 6 stations that I ran and 2 more in the Saginaw area, he ended up selling them to Citadel Broadcasting. Bob Liggett did, for $120 million. Okay? So, wow, can you imagine? Okay, and so we had 110 employees, and I had a lot of employees with me for a long time. Remember, I started at FMK, right? And then when he bought more, I had more responsibilities management. Those people that I originally hired in 1988 stuck with me till I was there through 2004. Bob Liggett sold in 2000 for this $120 million, okay? He ended up buying big boy restaurants. He owned some other radio stations. He's an entrepreneur. It's the Midas touch on a Michigan basis, okay? He's still alive, still keep in touch with him. So I'm small potatoes with my 3 radio stations, okay? But what ended up happening was back in 2000 or 2004, I stayed on with Citadel that bought it, And then Citadel went through a lot of transformations, and people got ousted, the people that started Citadel. And Citadel was sold to, and they brought their own people in, and I eventually lost my job. So here I am, a 49-year-old, you know, entrepreneur, or whatever you call it, okay? Caught between a rock and a hard place. What do I do now, okay? We moved from Ohio back in 1988, okay? Go Bucks. In 1989, I became a Spartan, okay? Because of these 6 radio stations that I was involved with, we carried the Spartans. You know, we had all the coaches on, Tim Stout, all of those people were coming through our company. They were working through us. So consequently, I became a Spartan. So my son, who's 28 now, graduated from MSU. We moved him here when he was 3. Okay, so all of a sudden, then you have a decision to make. You know, where do you go? What do you do? So Bob Liggett, myself, and another gentleman, the former president of our company, ended up looking around the state for radio stations to buy. And as it turned out, the station that I bought in the Castle was available, but I had to get through some hurdles to do it. Here's where the FCC came in. What had happened was the license, okay, the things that the sponsor the legal ID that I told you about, the other rules, there are many of them, you know, sponsor identification. The public has a right to know who paid for that advertisement. Tool Liquidation Company is having a tool liquidation sale at the Holiday Inn, okay? Chances are the Holiday Inn's not paying for that spot. You'll hear Tool Liquidators Incorporated or whatever. Those subtle things. The public has a right to know who paid for that advertisement, so there must be sponsor identification. We have to maintain a public file, okay? In a public file drawer similar to this, the public can come in and have an opportunity to look at that public file, although they never do. Okay, you talk about wasted, you know, government interference versus involvement, okay? In my 36 years in the business, I think there's been one or two times that somebody's come in to look at the public file. Now let me tell you what's in the public file, okay? Probably the most valuable thing is what we call our quarterly public file or needs and issues list. Each quarter, we have to ascertain what the problems, needs, and issues of the community are through community leaders, and then do programming to be responsive to those needs and issues. And we have to put all that in our public file. All the political, you know, we're obligated to if we sell a candidate, we have to sell federal candidates. The rules on selling political advertising are this thick. That's why you hear sponsored by or paid for. Okay, that all has to be in there, a lot of paperwork. A political candidate that comes in that's running for office, we have to sell federal candidates' offices or time. They're entitled to the lowest unit rate. So if I have an advertiser that spends $100,000 a year with me, okay, in theory they might have a lower rate than somebody that spends $5,000 with me, correct? Okay? That political advertiser is entitled to that $100,000 lower rate for buying one commercial. So we have to maintain that. We have to maintain letters from the public, ownership reports. It's onerous. It's here again. The 1934 Communications Act, remember that, said that as a public trustee, I don't own the license. I'm the custodian of the license. And it's good now for 8 years. That license is good for 8 years. And what it says is you have to operate your broadcast station in the public interest, convenience, and necessity. Okay, interesting words, choice of word, 1934. So all of these things, here again, I've never seen anybody, maybe a couple come in to look at it, but these are the regs that we're still dealing with, okay? Even though the telecommunications law of 1996 deregulated a lot of that. Okay, so now let's move on a little bit to, let's talk a little bit about pricing my product. How do I price my product? I have 3 radio stations and each one is different, okay? It's all based on, yes, supply and demand. Historically, when we first sold radio advertising back in the 60s or whatever, 50s and 60s, it was sold on units. You would say, if you buy 300 of these units over the course of the year, your rate is this. If you buy 1,500, your rate's lower, okay? Well, fine and dandy, but if you want to grow your revenue, okay, you have to look at your supply and demand. Unlike a newspaper, we can't add another page. We have so many units. And the NAB, okay, that published this legal guide, there was an unwritten code. The FCC didn't tell you how many commercial units you could run. The NAB published a code, and you either belonged to the NAB and you subscribed to their code, and everybody knew that if you subscribed to that code, which told you how many commercials you could air per hour, that you probably wouldn't be fined or have your license in jeopardy from the FCC. But they also did away with that. So we could add how many units we want, but we didn't, because here again, you gotta have programming in between, right? So how do we price our product? I have my Flint station that I have is the biggest revenue generator because it's in a rated market, it's in a large market, it's almost the size of Lansing. And this station that I have in Flint is one of the top tiered radio stations. So our prices, you know, is the inventory, okay, right like that. You keep escalating your prices. I'm in a market in one of my stations, okay, in the Elma area. I have a competitor over there that's selling spots for $1 a holler. Okay? Can you imagine that? How would you like to compete against that? He could get $15 per commercial, but he's selling it for $1. Now what I really want to do is I want to pick up the phone and say, are you nuts? I had to line you up in front of a radio firing squad. You know, why are you doing this? You're driving money out of the marketplace. But guess what? I can't do it, can I? Why? Why can't I do it? Pardon me? I can't tell him get your prices up. You could be getting 15. The FCC has nothing to do with it. It's the indirectly, did I say indirectly the FTC regulates me? What am I doing there? Price fixing. I would be price fixing or colluding. Can't have it. Now, can you imagine if he goes from selling it from $1 to $2? What happens? That's a 100% increase. Right? You see what I'm saying? Okay, that's the kind of stuff. Now, had an advertiser through the years, also another one that came to us and said, look, particular category, jeweler, said, I'll buy your radio station, but I don't want any other jewelers on the radio station. Okay? I'm going to spend X amount of dollars with you, and that should be good enough, but I don't want to hear another jeweler on the radio station. Can I do that? I can? Freedom, right?
Yeah.
First Amendment? No. I can't do that. Why? Why can't I do that? FTC again. Restraint of trade. Okay? I cannot restrain trade. In other words, I can't guarantee him. I can choose to say I'm not going to accept this or that or whatever. But if he comes to me with that proposition, that is a restraint of trade. I can't do it. So these are the kinds of issues that we're really dealing with. Okay. Now, so what determines, going back to the prices, what determines my prices? Generally, more ratings, right? More ratings, more customers. I can have the lowest rated radio station, but if I have more customers than the next person, I have less supply, right? That means more demand on my product. What goes up, what happens? Price goes up, right? Remember, I started with FMK in 1988, and it eventually became the top radio station, and the highest billing radio station in the market. In our rates, when I started, varied from $20 to $30 to $40, okay, per commercial. there were times, depending on the demographic that would come up, I'll never forget this. Do they still have a fashion bug around here? Has anybody heard of fashion bug? They were primarily after women 18 to 34. And we had droves of them. Okay? And so they based it off of, here's what I'm willing to pay based on your ratings. And you know what rate I got? $250 for one commercial. Okay? See how the price, supply and demand works? Supply and demand can be artificially created. I don't. Two of my stations aren't in metro markets, so there aren't ratings to have. One is. So I don't know what my price. You know, I have to base it on driving the marketplace, creating opportunities. Okay, competition, right? Here again, Sirius, XM, Spotify, Pandora, you name it. All right. What's happening? 90% of the population, of the adult population, is still listening to radio every week. Okay? 90+%. I just read a study the other night. Do you realize you're considered a millennial? Right? We, you know, Generation X, Y, and so forth. You guys are millennials. Millennials are born in the early 80s to the early 2000s. You qualify, right? Is that correct? Okay, I want to make sure. Sometimes I have to get out the calculator to do the math. It just doesn't jive. So, with simple addition and subtraction. But, so, you guys love FM radio. You love FM radio. You don't know, however, about AM radio that much, okay? But do you know that in the top markets, I'm talking about the LAs, the Chicagos, the Detroits, the Philadelphias, those markets that have huge populations, you know, a few million and more, you know the #1 rated stations are AMs. They're generally news talk types of stations, or news stations, okay? So you don't understand the value of it primarily because of the technology, all right? So ultimately, how do we compete? Traditionally, we compete. You see, I have an old phone here. I don't have a smartphone. This is a military phone. So when I'm out there hand-to-hand combat, that's what they call it, and I drop it in the water, it still will survive. But I do have an iPad. Okay, so the reason I say this, okay, is we're competing traditionally. Historically, we competed against the radio business, competed against newspaper, television, outdoor. Now we've got this digital world, right? We've got social media. And everybody's trying to yank and steal dollars. You know, the newspaper business, okay, 5 years ago I read an article that said, in 5 years they're gone. They won't even be around. Has anybody heard of M Live? M Live? Okay. M Live is a consortium of newspapers that have newspapers, okay, and they came up with this digital platform, this digital model and so forth, and they drive traffic through it, and they've reinvented themselves. So all that lost revenue that went, you know, that was going from traditional newspaper advertising is now going and shifting into that world. And it's doing the same with our business, albeit slowly, okay? Some companies are not set up yet to be able to do that. So, here again, restraint of trade, price fixing. One final story. When I bought, did I tell you the story when I bought the station in Flint? Okay. Cumulus and Citadel. You've heard of those? Cumulus Broadcasting, Citadel Broadcasting?
Huge corporations, tons of stations.
Yep. Not quite as big as Clear Channel, okay? The original consolidator, okay? But remember, Citadel was the station that bought Bob Liggett out, remember? And so they amassed not only his 6 or 8 stations, 6 here, and they bought a bunch of stations across the country, so Citadel became that, okay? The consolidators. Now all of a sudden, okay, you've got a situation where you've got these publicly held companies, okay, coming into the picture. So there's a lot of capital involved, all right? But there was a recession going on too, right? So the multiples of what these businesses were worth. When I say Bob Liggett sold them for 120 million, the revenue in all of those markets went down too. And so did the multiples on which they sold for. So think that the world has changed. But last year, or in 2011, Citadel got bought out by Cumulus, and that combined company now represented 500 and some stations across the country. That combined company, the Justice Department stepped in and looked at this all of the markets they were in. And they looked at two markets, Harrisburg, Pennsylvania, and Flint, Michigan, and said you have too high of a revenue concentration in that market. We got to break it up. And we're not. And what you're going to have to do is you're going to have to sell some stations to get under their what they call, I think it's called an HHI index. So they had to bring it down, and they had to sell something of substance. So I ended up dealing with the Department of Justice, fully vetted by the Department of Justice. Had to go. My wife and I had to go through that whole thing, and just just a long process. Keep in mind the FCC had no say at all, but the Justice Department did. They had to approve it first before the FCC will approve it. They worked hand in hand with each other. This one has to happen first, and so it was proved. And so here again, these are the kinds of things. But we're running out of time, right? And we might have some questions, correct?
Correct.
Okay, so, or any other areas? Questions?
Or cookies too.
More cookies. I hopped, skipped,
You guys
and
got
jumped,
cookies?
and I missed some.
You brought in cookies. Who wants cookies? Who doesn't want cookies?
Too early for cookies, right?
Any questions? I had you write down
Come
a
on,
couple
you gotta
questions.
have a couple. So who's gonna be brave enough? I'm throwing out a couple more shirts. Okay. You didn't get a shirt, right? Okay.
So you were talking about like the profit and how you decide your profits of it. How do you decide your salaries? Like how much you pay people?
Position, okay, market size, revenue size. The industry also has studies and standards on how much this person might make and how much this person might make by market size.
So does the FCC regulate that?
No, not regulated at all. Oh. Here's the Fox. This is the Flint station. There you go, classic rock.
What is the difference between AM radio and FM?
AM radio is referred to, it's amplitude modulation, and FM is frequency modulation. And basically, it's a bandwidth, okay? And there's generally classes of time, classes in different cities and different power grades for each one. And and some would say it's the quality of the signal. You know, AM is, you hear static, there's interference with a rainstorm. For example, let me give you a quick thing on temperature inversion. Your favorite radio station sometimes, okay, when you get by a red light, might not come in because it's affected by the red light. But also there's something called temperature inversions as well. That where, you know, normally the higher that you go up in the atmosphere, the colder the air. Sometimes when these temperature inversions occur, that cold air gets ducted or trapped in between, and you can't even pick up the signal that you normally would pick up. You might hear a station 2 or 3 hours away on that same frequency coming in. It's called a temperature inversion.
You're still working with
T-shirt?
I better save a couple for the next class, right?
The castle? Oh. Yes, sir.
You're still working with Bob Liggett.
Uh-huh.
How much do you think how would you have to do more?
Well, here's what happened during that period. A lot of, in my opinion, a lot of bad, number one, I was gone. Okay.